Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's event. I'm Laura Dillon from MSDynamicsWorld, and we're here today for a session to learn how to simplify, optimize, and automate your documents in D365 and Power Platform with Xpertdoc. We have a team of experts from Xpertdoc here with us today. Our presenters are Louis-Philippe Perras, Danielle Marcinkowski, Stefan Cloutier, and Pam Valentes, and it's my pleasure to welcome them here with us today. Now, as we get started, please know that we do welcome your questions. You can feel free to type those in at any time during the presentation and demo. You'll see a little chat window in your GoToWebinar dashboard. You can click on that, type in a question, and someone from the Xpertdoc team will follow up with you directly after the session. So Pam, without any further delay, I'm going to hand things off to you to get us started.
Thanks, Laura. So I will cover our agenda for today's session, and then I will turn it over to Danielle, who will walk you through the Xpertdoc solution in more detail. So today we will cover who Xpertdoc is, for those of you who may not know, a product demonstration of our document generation solution, and then we'll go into a little bit more of a deeper dive into how we integrate with Power Automate, followed by a quick Q&A session at the end. So before we get started, Xpertdoc was pleased to announce back in December 18th that we were acquired by Experlogix, a leader in the CPQ, configure price quote software space, and we are thrilled to move forward with them as a unified company in 2021. So without further ado, Danielle will now take you through the Xpertdoc solution in more detail.
Thanks, Pam. The Xpertdoc document generation solution is really focused on helping customers simplify, optimize, and automate the document generation process without the need of coding or IT resources. We have a full turnkey integration with Microsoft Dynamics 365, Power Automate, and SharePoint. We've designed our products to be easy to use, easy to implement, and easy to manage. So if you're creating quotes, financial statements, welcome letters, or legal agreements, we can empower business users to make those necessary changes around document generation, removing a lot of the common bottlenecks and improving the time it takes to create, generate, deliver, and store business critical documents. Xpertdoc does all the heavy lifting on the back end so business users can focus on other priorities. Our solution is powerful yet simple to use, scalable from small business customers with 8 users all the way up to thousands of users in the large enterprise space. We provide the flexibility and the automated capabilities that customers can use in a wide variety of ways. Customers typically come to Xpertdoc because they're having challenges managing their current document processes. It's very manual, time-consuming, there's too many errors to fix, the process is not scalable or flexible to meet the customer's changing business needs. We had a customer, for example, had a quote process that took 50 to 60 steps to create a quote document. The sales team took time looking for information, copying, pasting, doing manual calculations, resizing images, and then verifying if they'd missed anything. We took all of those steps in the process and bundled that into a few clicks, drastically reducing the time from quoting to hours to minutes. This was a huge productivity gain for the customer. So we can transform the complex to simple with a few clicks, reduce the dependence on IT, increase productivity and efficiency, automate compliance to business rules. The document output is a high quality, versatile document, and we allow customers to make the most of their multiple sources of data. The customer industries that we're in, we're typically seeing success in customers in the finance industry, healthcare, insurance, higher education, and manufacturing. But this is by no means an exhaustive list because the Xpertdoc product can scale to any vertical or use case. The typical use cases that we see are proposals, quotes, contracts, policies, endorsements, invoicing. What customers love the most about the Xpertdoc solution is that they can automatically add in their product specifications, imaging, T's and C's, barcodes, calculations, multi-language, conditional logic. This is all done for them with the Xpertdoc solution. So how does it work? We have an easy 3-step process where we create a data set, template, and flow. These are designed by the administrator. The business user would simply need to select the document process that they want, click the button, and all of those items are generated on the back end. So why don't we show you how it works? We've got a great demo set up, and I'll pass that over to Stefan.
Thank you, Danielle. In this part of today's session, I will be showing you the integration of Dynamics 365 with Xpertdoc Smart Flows. First, I will be showing you from within the quote entity of Dynamics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be triggering some documents, and I'll be starting by going into a quote. And once I'm into a quote, you will notice that we have our Smart Flow buttons on the top. So first, I will be triggering a flow that will be generating a quote in PDF, and at the same time, creating a note in Dynamics and attaching this document within the note. All that done in one click. So I'm going to click here and select my flow. This will be triggering the execution panel and will be creating the document in a PDF. So if I click here, we'll notice that the document was created in a PDF. So this is all coming in from Dynamics 365 with my welcome letter. And we also have like our quote line items with pictures. These pictures are being pulled from an FTP site and are entered into my table. So there it is. All right, this is flow number 1. Very simple to do. So the next flow that I will be showing you is from within the quote list, and I'm going to be selecting one of the item. And this flow will ask the user for some input that will modify the behavior of the generated document. So I'm going to be triggering this flow, and you will notice in the execution panel we have in questions for the user. So now the user is able to add, let's say, a paragraph in the generated document. So I'm going to just type in this is a test. And also asking, let's say, if you want to bring in product information, these would be pulled in from various location. Could be from SharePoint, from an FTP site, or from within Dynamics. So I'm going to select, I want these product information. And also, do you want to send to DocuSign? So for e-signing, we do integrate with DocuSign, Adobe Sign, OneSpan Sign, and Certify. So I'm going to trigger my flow, click on Next. And now what it will do is it will generate my document, send it to DocuSign, which I will be getting the email in a second. So I will be getting that very shortly. Usually it takes about 5-10 seconds to get it. Here we go. We got the email from DocuSign. So I'm going to click and review my document that was generated. Here it is. So this is the quote that was sent to the customer with the table and line items, the location for my signature. Since we said that we wanted the product information, these been pulled into my quote. And now that everything has been done and to my liking, I'm going to click on sign, and I'm going to sign and finish. Now that this is done, my flow will then resume to the next step that we configured into SmartFlow. So the next step will be creating a note, attaching the signed document, and at the same time storing a copy of that signed document into SharePoint. So when DocuSign sends the information, the document back to us, the flow will resume to the next step. Keep in mind, the user doesn't have to sit there and wait. The flow will automatically resume and do the next steps. Here we go. So this is done. You create a note in Dynamics and storing it to SharePoint. So if I want to show you from within my customer, if I go to my quote, and if I go to the note, you will notice that we just have the signed document that was just generated, attaching directly into Dynamics. Next but not last, my next step will be triggering multiple quotes. These quotes will be multi-language, so every customer as a different language. So I'll be triggering a quote in Spanish, one in French, and one in English, all this in one click. And at the same time, we'll be creating a note, attaching those quotes into it, be sending an email to the customer in the customer language from a template, and at the end, storing everything back into SharePoint as well. Gonna click on Flow, multi-language, and now it will be triggering the 3 records, generating my 3 quotes and doing all the process for all these at one time. Shouldn't be too long. Here we go. So we generated my Spanish quote, create my note, send an email to the customer, storing it to SharePoint. All these done for all 3 languages. All right. Well, this is showing you how simple it is for the user to use SmartFlow within Dynamics. Next step, I will be from within the account entity. I'll be showing you another new feature that we came out with last year, which what we call our anonymous form. Anonymous form is a form, a web-based form that you would send to an external source, external contact from your outside of your Dynamics. Let's say for a customer, you're going to send an email with a web link. The customer will click on the link, and then it will open up in the browser a form that's been designed by you, and the customer will then fill in the form, and that form will then come back into SmartFlow, and you could generate a document with that document. So for this presentation, what I will do is we're going to pretend that we're a university and we're sending a university application to a student. The student will then get an email, and he will then fill in the form, and when he finalizes the form, and we'll submit it back into SmartFlows, and then this will be generating a document and storing it into my note. So if I click here, go to my SmartFlow and university application. Right now, what it's doing, it's going to be sending an email to the student with the hyperlink, and then you can just click on the link and open up and just generate a form. So by clicking on the link, it will be just a second, I'll be getting the email in. So when you click on the link, the browser will open up with the form, and this form can be dynamically modified based on the answer from the user or the customer. So this is the form. We have multiple controls that should be on the like text box. You can have date pickers, and it's fillable. You can have tab as well, index, so you can have multiple tabs with tables, option buttons, and so on. So I'm just going to quickly fill in a few fields just to show you, which is Stéphane Cloutier. And the street is mandatory, so we put an asterisk to it, so it needs to be filled in. 2525 North Avenue, whatever, so I'll skip the rest. So if the correspondence is the same as the home address, it's fine. If it's not, the system will ask you to enter the correspondent address. So that's dynamically done based on the answer of the user. Fill in the form, and as well, we have this as a mandatory field. So have you applied for visa before? If you say yes, it's going to ask you what type of visa and so on. If you say no, this is fine. Have you ever been refused before? If you say no. And the beauty of this form is the user that's filling the form could save it as draft. So meaning if the form is long to fill in and he doesn't have the time to complete everything, so you could save as draft and come back later on, and all the information that was entered will be saved. But let's pretend that we're done. So what we're going to do is we're going to submit. Once it's submitted, next, my flow will then resume with the next step. So it will be creating my document and creating a note based on the information entered by the customer. So if you look at the document that we just generated with the anonymous form, so it's my university application form, and then the data that we just entered in it. Here we go. So in a nutshell, this is the way that from the user experience. Now we're going to show you how it's done behind the scene. So we're going to switch over to our project console. To generate a flow, to generate a document, It's very simple. It's a 3-step process. First step would be to create a data set that are used to populate a template. Then you would need to design a template. And then after that, once it's done, you design the flow of what steps you want to do in your generated document. So quickly, I'm going to go in and show you a data set. And I'm going to get my data set for a quote. So if you notice here, we have our primary entity, which is quote, and we can have also have sub entities part of this data set. So we have all the fields coming in, we have the many-to-one relation, and you could drag as much as sub entities that are required in this data set. Once you create your data set, you would associate some sample data with it. The reason to associate sample data with a data set is for the designer when you're creating your template, it's to provide data for them to test the template when they're designing it. Keep in mind, data set as well could be from external sources like XML payload that you could get and so on. Next step will be to do template. So I'm going to go on the template portion, and I'm going to pick up our multi-language template that we just did. And this is our template with the one data set that's part of it. When you design a template, you could have multiple data sets as part of a template. So it could be very, you could do a lot of stuff than just having one simple data set part of a template. And then we're going to click on design and design. So when you're designing a template, we leverage Microsoft Word as a template designer, meaning that every functionality that Microsoft has to offer, we do support, plus we add our own add-in features to it. So we have our plugin that's being added to it. So I'll be showing you this in a second. I'll be opening up my Word template, which is on the other screen. Here we go. So now that we've opened up our template, then if you notice on the top part, we have Xpertdoc ribbon, which will be all our functionalities. So if I start by explaining, we have multi-language variant of this template. So you could pick up any type of language. In my presentation right now, I have 3 languages for the template. You could copy over from an existing template. We support barcode, QR code. We support images coming from multiple sources. We have formula, e-signature, as mentioned before. We support DocuSign, Adobe Sign, OneSpan Sign, and Certify. We also support Microsoft Chart, which could be dynamically populated from a data set coming in from your CRM. Publish button is if you want to upload the template back to SmartFlow server, and the beauty of it is we keep track of history of all the version of a template, so you could roll back to any previous version if you want to. The preview is mostly for the person designing the template that wants to do a preview while designing, and the preview could be done in Word, PDF, or HTML. My sample data is a sample that was associated with the data set once we design it. Okay, so once this is it, on the right side, we have what we call our Xpertdoc template builder pane with all the data set or data sets that are part of this document. And if you see here, we have 3 tabs. First tab is the data set or data sets. Second tab will be all the map field on your document. And then we have the Xpertdoc style. So quickly, I'm going to show you part of these icons that we have in the data set when you map your data to it. So first will be mapping a field. How would you map a field? Then first thing is to position your cursor where you want the field to be mapped. Then would be selecting the field in your data set that you want mapped. And the beauty of it, when you select your field, we have what we call in the bottom our field inspector. And this will be showing you the value that's in the field that's part of our data set. So it helps the designer making sure that they're picking the right field to map at the right place. So to map this field, it's either double clicking on the field or click on the pointy arrow to map the field. And boom, this is it, map into my document. Next item I will show you will be a condition. We like to say with SmartFlow, it's a low-code, no-code application, so you could do very powerful features or very powerful functions without even doing a line of code. So let's say I want to do a condition. Condition is a three-step process. You would highlight the part of the document or part of that you want to be conditional. So it could be a word, a paragraph, a page, a field, and you can also set conditions within condition. So first step is highlight the portion that you want to be conditional. Then select the field that you want the condition to be based on, and then click on condition. This will open up the wizard of the condition. So very easy, it's going to tell you you're doing your condition on the state and province, it's a text field, and you want it to be equal to. It could be equal to a hard-coded search, or it could be based on another field as well. So I'm going to say for my sample today, it's going to be for Michigan State. Click on OK. So my condition is there. If I move my cursor over, you will notice that I have my condition is there and it's based on this entire paragraph. And to validate if my condition works, I'm going to do a preview. And if my billing state of this sample data is in Michigan, the paragraph should be displayed. If not, it will not be part of my document. So I'm going to click on preview. This will be generating just a preview document with my sample data in Word. And if you notice, my paragraph is not there because my billing state is Washington. So my condition works. Next step would be looping. So we do support looping, any type of looping. We have also grouping. So to group item within a loop. We have pseudo field, which is calculated field, result set, pseudo relation, which is if you're mixing data from CRM with external data. So this would be to create manually a relation between those two data sets, and so on. Next item I'm going to show you is our mapping. Very simple, is the map field. So let's say I'm going to pick a field, which is my request date, which is this field, and I'm going to click on setting. In your setting for the field, you can then click here, and you could set the date format, set the locale, the way you want your date layout. We can also configure the font for that field. We could do text editing with replace and insert. We can convert if this field is related to an image. We can convert to an image. If this is the case, we will pick up the source. It could be from a URL, from SharePoint, from whatever within Dynamics, and so on. So this would be getting the image in. I mentioned we support barcode, QR codes, preserve formatting. This would be if you want to pull in, let's say, a document from an external source as well. So we could say, okay, I want to bring in a docx document, same thing as the image. We would need to know the URL or where we'll be pulling this document from. And we have as well in there e-signature. Very simply, like we said, we support for signature. What you would do is you would click support insert DocuSign. Then you would configure the recipient, the email from a field or in the name. And we also support the advanced options, sort of like routing or order. So if you have multiple people signing one document, this would be the routing orders of the people signing. And we have also others to remove blanks and create hyperlinks. So this would be how you would configure a regular field. And at the same time, once I'm here, if I could save this formatting, and I would say the configuration that I did, I'm going to call this one long date. And this is it. Click on OK once I'm done. And I'll be showing you what I just did with the long date. Next, we have regular fields. This is a condition. We have a loop. And in looping, we also have different settings. So in the loop, you have setting. You could do sorting. You could set limits of items. You can control the break behavior. And you can also do table merge. This would be for my loop. And the setting that I saved, which is my date. Next time I have a date in my document, all I need to do is do a right click, assign my Xpertdoc style, and this is the long date. So the configuration I did in my long date will then be applied directly to that field without having to go into the setting all the time. And this is it for the template designing portion. Next, so now we've done 2 steps out of the 3. So we did the data set, we did the template, and now we're going to show you the flow. Flow, we have 2 different types of flow, and I'm going to pick one. We have the simple flow and the advanced flow. The difference between the 2 flows, the simple flow, you have the preset section on the left, and a flow will always start from the top to bottom. An advanced flow, you don't have preset sections, so you could do stuff in any order you want. First, where does my flow start? My flow will start from Dynamics, but it could also be starting from another application or from the execution panel. Collect data, so this will be, we will collect the data from my data set, which is from Dynamics. The next block, the next section would be, generate document. So I'll be generating a document from this template, from the data coming in from this this data set, and this one will be language driven based on a field in CRM. The document name, where I want to save it, you could add date format and time format to this document, and the format I want to save in. So if I want to save a docx or PDF or multiple type of document format that you could do. So let's say it's a PDF. Next, we're going to do next step. Once you do your document, now what do we want to do with it? It's our store and deliver process. So we said, okay, first I want to create a note in CRM. So into my note, I want to attach the document that was generated. And my note will be regarding the account as well. And the title of my note will be customer quote number with the quote ID. And the description will be hard-coded as this quote was submitted to the customer. If you want the user to manually type in a description, you would just toggle edit here, and the user will be prompted to enter a description if you want to. The next step is email. Oh, so the email is, we do what we call a switch. It's a case selection. So if you want to, it's my customer is in French, it's going to send a French email, English, and Spanish, and so on. This is how it will be done. And finally, the next step will be storing into SharePoint. So we want to store the document in SharePoint. You could specify the site or the path folder and so on. So this is it for my flow. And as well in the flows, you have also the add block. So you could add more features. So these would be the features when you do the store and deliver. So you could do multiple actions at the same time. So these will be all triggered one after the other one, and it will be automatically done without the user intervention. All right, so I'm going to leave this. As you see, the 1, 2, 3 step process is done. So now that our flow is done, it's going to be available from Dynamics in your system. Last but not least, I'm going to just do a quick overview of the control panel. Control panel, we have the connectors. So this is where you would create the connectors between, let's say we have connectors for DocuSign in Dynamics. We have connectors if you have Power Automate, FTP site to extract images or files or documents, and SMTP for my email if you want to as well. We also have the language variant. This is where you would trigger or manage languages. Tags is a way of organizing your flow, your data set, and your templates. We have asset, small repository where you could store file images or little items that you need to reuse in your templates and your flows. User management, where you would create the users. Printer, for printer, if you're installed on the cloud, we require print node, but if you're installed on premise, we support local printer as well. The backup and restore is to back up and restore all of the project and the flows. Import, it would be to, let's say you export from your development environment a flow back into your production. This is what you would use. And we also have a very simple and very nice reporting tool that will allow you to view and see all the flows that were triggered, their status, who triggered it, when, what time. And this is good to investigate flows for any type of flow or any user from any period of time and the status of those flows. And that would be it for the portion of SmartFlow Project Console and Dynamics. The next step will be from Louis-Philippe. He'll be showing you the part about Power Automate.
All right, so as Stefan mentioned, we'll be demoing how easy it is to integrate Xpertdoc Smart Flows from Power Automate. We also have a workflow integration within Dynamics that you can use, but as you might already be aware, Microsoft is deprecating that integration and suggests people to move on with the Power Automate platform. And this is why we have the connector built for that platform. So like you just saw by Stefan, we have that integration within Dynamics where we have the Smart Flows button that can be done from the grid or from the entity themselves. But we also wanted to make that integration as easy to use for Power Automate. So when you click Flow here, you can see all flows that you already have, but can also easily create a new flow. So this is what I will do for this simple demo, is that I will create a flow directly from Dynamics. And then by doing so, it automatically configures my flow to start from the common data service, which is where the data is stored from Dynamics CE, and then a custom action that we will be customizing to use the Xpertdoc connector in it. So I can click continue to start developing that simple Power Automate flow. So I click continue, and then some of you might already be familiar with this, but this will be triggered whenever a record is selected from Dynamics. In that particular scenario, if you recall, I was in quotes within CRM, but that can be from any entity. Smart Flows is not limited to entities, even not only the ones that are built in, but if you build custom entities, these would also be available for you to use. And since we're in the Power Automate platform, the other thing that is interesting is that it does not need to be necessarily from Dynamics CE. You can only use the CDS as your backend and build Power Apps that would leverage entities that you develop without ever needing to do the UI interface that Stefan showed before within Dynamics CE and trigger everything automatically or through a Power App that you would develop. So from there, what I can do is create a new step. And then our connector is called Xpertdoc. So I will search for it and then you can see it. This is a premium connector, so you need to have the license for it. But typically, once you have Dynamics C or CDS integration, you do have access to premium connectors. Our connector with the version that we have now has 3 operations. I will talk a little bit later about new things that we're adding to it that should be approved soon. But I will start by executing a Dynamics flow from Smart Flow. So I know the flow word is used a little bit often here, but now what I will do is execute a flow that is stored in Smart Flows like you were just demonstrated. So I need to select which entity or the entity ID that I want this flow to start with. So simply by clicking here, you can see that I have access to previous steps in the Power Automate platform. So I will select the quote because I'm in the quote entity. So you see that there are lots of fields, but somewhere there should be the quote. Let me find it for a second. I will scroll here. I think I can search. So I have quote. Simply clicking on it, this will bind the quote ID to the entity that we want to execute for. And then it asks me for which smart flow I want to execute. So we have a dynamically populated dropdown here that lists flows that are within my smart flows project. In that particular project, I only have 2 flows. So I will select the one called quote, and I named it that way so that it's simple to understand that this particular flow will execute a template that knows about a data set that was configured for a quote. There's an optional field that you can set here, which is the username of the user that you want this execution to be on behalf of. By default, this will use the service account that you configured your connector in Power Automate with. So I will leave that blank for now. But if you would like to do impersonation by using the user that started the Power Automate flow, this is something you can also do. So you see, I only needed to bind 2 fields. So the quote, which is the quote identifier, and then I execute that flow from the Power Automate platform. Then I will add new steps just to show you other capabilities that we have. I search again for Xpertdoc, and the next one I want to do is get documents. The reason there's an S documents is that in a flow, you can have multiple results. So I might be sending one document to an agent and another document to a customer, for example, and there might be multiple documents resulting out of that flow. So we made it very generic so that if you have multiple results, you can go through all of them and only get the first one that we find within the smart flow. So I would click Get Documents, and this requires an execution. The execution comes from the previous step I did, which is Execute Dynamics Flow. So I will click Execution, and then that will map that execution to the Get Documents operation that I'm calling here. So really simple. Now this will retrieve all documents that's resulted from the smart flow. I might not need to do that. Maybe just starting the flow from SmartFlow is enough, and we'll store the documents in a note as an attachment, or we'll send an email, and that's enough for me. But if I would like to retrieve that document in Power Automate, then I will call Get Documents. And then I will show you the other operation that we have available for you to use. The other one is Download Document. So when we call Get Documents, it does not fetch the content of the document. It only retrieves a list of all documents that were outputted from the Execute Dynamics flow, but you might not want to retrieve all these documents' content. So this is why we've put that into two separate operations, is that first I want to have a list of all these documents. Then I could add logic. If my document is a PDF, do something. If it's a docx, do something. So we added that in separate steps so that you have total control over what you want to do and not impact performance by downloading things that you might not need. So once I do the download document, you will see that it asks for a document. So I can click the document from my previous step. And something that Power Automate does really well is that it realizes that the Get Documents might have multiple results. So this is an array. There are multiple of them. So it will automatically apply a add and apply to each. You could remove that, but I would leave it like that, because even if you add one, there's no real downside of leaving it that way. And if you change your smart flow to have multiple outputs, then you would get them all at that point. So then it does the download documents. So that would go through all the documents that were generated and then download them individually. Now, what I could do is that since I have the content of my document, I can leverage the power of that platform to store documents into things that Xpertdoc might not support out of the box. As Stefan mentioned earlier, yes, we can store to notes within Dynamics, we can send to SharePoint, we can send to printer, we can send to FTP. So there are lots of connectors that we already have within the Xpertdoc platform, but there are some that we don't and customers might be interested with. So one of them, for example, is OneDrive. We do not have an out-of-the-box integration with OneDrive, but Power Automate does. So what I will do is I will add an action here and we'll search for OneDrive. So again, this is typical Power Automate, nothing specific to Xpertdoc. So I will use the OneDrive for Business, and then I will create a file. I can select the root folder just for demo purposes, but you can make that configurable and store it to the folder that matches the quote the quote name from CRM or something like that. So you can make that very flexible. The file name, we do have a file name that we got from the Get Documents operation that I called earlier. So I can map that out to document name so that I don't need to type in a name at this place. I can hardcode it, and I'll show you how later, but let's map it to what was returned by SmartFlows. And then there's the file content. This is what we got from the document content that was returned from the download document operation that I called earlier. So it is that simple. I can call it my super demo, just to show you that I'm not kidding and this really works. And then I can save that. So by saving that flow, automatically it should then appear as flows that I can execute from a quote within Dynamics. This is how the Power Platform works. Let me refresh it just to make sure that appears. This is a requirement when you build new flows in Dynamics CE. So I will refresh that page, and then by selecting a quote like that, waiting for the flow to appear. Let me refresh again. Again, this is typical Dynamics, not something that's specific to us. So we just need the flow to appear. Let me make sure that I saved it properly. So if I go into flows, I can see that it's here. And then from there, if I click flow, you can see that my super demo, the flow I just created within Power Automate, is now listed as a flow that I can start. So I will click it, and then the flow will be started from the Power Automate platform. It shows me what it requires. So it requires the Common Data Service, the Xpertdoc connector, and the OneDrive for Business. The Xpertdoc connector is really easy to set up. It can work with Dynamics or on-prem environments of SmartFlows. You just set up the URL and then provide an API key. It's very simple and straightforward, and then I will run this flow. So once I start it, I can go back to the Power Automate platform and see that the flow I just started should be running, which it is now. So I will refresh. This is still running. I just want to show you after in different steps that all the parameters that we had dynamic were set up properly. So you see that it took about 16 seconds to do the whole thing. So start it up, execute the document, retrieve all of them, and then store them into OneDrive. You can see that doing the web call to do the execution took about 8 seconds, and retrieve the document, and then storing it into OneDrive. I can get more detail as to what exactly was called, so I can see the ID of the entity that I just started it from, the execution, and everything. So this is probably the simplest way to use the connector in Power Automate. Typically, what we see is that people, instead of using it with a button like I just showed, because this is already what we do from SmartFlows, would typically create a flow in the that would be triggered whenever something changed. So the scenario would be whenever the status of my quote changes to something, then automatically trigger the execution within Power Automate so that end users never forget and don't need to press a specific button to start that execution. Another thing that it allows you to do is that you might want to do everything as Stefan showed earlier. You start from that button, you start from the SmartFlows button, and then you might want to store in OneDrive, or you want to store in Azure Blob Storage, or things that we might not have today within the product. So what you can also do is that you can use the HTTP connector in SmartFlows to call Power Automate only to store the documents. So let me show you what I mean by that. Is that I can create a flow, and instead of being triggered and do the execution and everything, I can create a new flow, and these are instant cloud flow, and I create them as an HTTP request. And by doing so, I can modify it and say this will receive a document ID. And this might be a bit more advanced, but those of you that already played with the Power Platform are probably used to that. So I'm saying I'm expecting a document ID out of that. And then I click done, and then I can add a new step and use the same step I showed you earlier. So I will type in Xpertdoc and then directly do the download document. So I do not need to go through a list, because what I will receive is the ID of that document that needs to be pulled in dynamically. So I will go there, link it to the document ID that was received by that request. Then I can do the same thing I did earlier, just to keep it simple, and use OneDrive. And then I can create a file. I can use the same path. So everything I showed you earlier, and I won't go through all these steps because you already saw them, but the same thing I did earlier can be used only to do the storing to another system that we might not support within SmartFlows. And then this is really easy from SmartFlows. As Stefan mentioned earlier, we do have an HTTP connector, and then I configure that HTTP connector with the URL that is provided to me by the Power Automate platform. So that URL, once I save it, let me save that flow so that I can show you what that looks like. So I will delete that uncompleted step and then save that Power Automate flow that I created. And then you see it creates me a post URL. So this is the URL where it's expecting to get the information. So I can copy this and use it within SmartFlows to trigger the download and then storage of that file to a system that we might not be aware of. Maybe MailChimp, anything that is supported by the Power Automate platform. So this is very, very useful. We also see customers going wild building Power Apps and using it more and more. We see it on a weekly basis when we see reports. So I'm sure you might have ideas on how to use it that we did not think about, but the thing is to see that this is available for you to use, and that you might think of other patterns that we did not think about. The last thing I want to mention is that we're working on a V2 of that connector that will allow you to do more. So the connector I just showed you in Xpertdoc allows you to have these 3 operations. We're adding new operations where you can be more specific as to what you expect with the execution. Right now, the execution is synchronous, so you have to wait until the execution is completed. We made it asynchronous so that you don't need to wait for that to complete and can do other things in your flow, and then be notified when the file is completed. So you saw earlier it took about 8 seconds. It's a little bit longer because it's going through the Power Automate platform. So you might want to do something else before it completed. So we allow you to do that. We also allow you to execute smart flows that might not be connected to CRM. So we support all kinds of flows. Some of them might be called by the API by getting an XML payload. Some of them might have smart forms, so we ask user for data input. So in that first version, we're limited to flow that would be triggered from Dynamics or the CDS, the Common Data Service. With that new version, we allow you to execute any type of flows supported within the Smart Flows platform. So it allows you to do even more than what you could do with the version that I just showed you. So this is what I had for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. We appreciate your time today on our session. In order to reach us, or if you have any further questions, you can follow us on our social media or get in touch with us through email at info@expertdoc.com.
Great. Thank you all so much for that terrific presentation. There was a lot of information in there, a great demo. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. We did record today's event and we'll be making that available as well. So on that, I think we'll end it there. Have a great day, everyone.